The very word secrecy is repugnant in a free and open society. And we are, as a people, inherently and historically opposed to secret societies, to secret oaths, and to secret proceedings. We decided long ago that the dangers of excessive and unwarranted concealment of pertinent facts far outweighed the dangers which are cited to justify it.
This is Dane Wigington with GeoEngineering Watch Radio and Global Alert News for Saturday morning, September 12th, 2015. Last week recap, we discussed, and the drama continues, the meaningless stories we see on mainstream media from the political theater. It never ends. Again, the Trump, Hillary Clinton theater, Hillary's emails, mass distraction, while the world burns and the toxic climate modification continues over our heads as we are superheated from atmospheric aerosols that are exposed to radio frequency transmissions. When you microwave metal in your microwave oven, what happens? When you microwave anything, heat is generated from the movement of those particulates. The atmosphere behaves in the same manner. So the geoengineers can create high-pressure domes of immense heat. What keeps happening in California again and again and again, the West Coast? Anybody who can't see the trails in our skies, can't see from day to day, something radical is going on with grid patterns one day and nothing the next. You're not looking hard enough. Last week I asked a few key questions about 9/11 that every citizen has a responsibility to ask themselves. Should we really believe our government has told us the truth? Much more on that subject in a few minutes. Last week we covered continuing record levels of cyclones in the Pacific. Cyclones are hurricanes, just a different name on a different side of the world. While hurricanes and hurricane activity in the Atlantic Basin continues at record low levels. No reason for this, no possible explanation given all the conditions we know exist, except for intentional suppression from geoengineering activity. And we know we have patents specifically for the suppression of hurricanes. Why would we think it's not being used? There is no other explanation for the lack of hurricane activity. Again, no major hurricane landfalls on U.S. shores in over a decade. Record-shattering period. Hurricanes are absolutely being suppressed, and we went over the weather trading derivatives gambling casino that's being run by the global elites. Look it up. This is hard fact. You have weather trading derivatives. Those who are connected to the weather modification programs are also connected to derivatives trading on the stock markets. Who is subjected to a disaster? Who is not? This is the foxes literally running the henhouse from bottom to top and making immense amounts of revenue off of these disasters. There's a much bigger picture to the climate modification, but this is simply the disaster capitalists making money along the way. Radical record swings in weather and temperatures will continue to unfold as the climate engineers put more and more pressure on the already broken climate system. These radical swings in weather from record high to drops of 30 and 40 degrees in one day. Methane is thawing and releasing from permafrost deposits. Mainstream media is now having a hard time not covering this, although they've tried for many years while we've spoken about it the entire time. The gravity of the methane situation can't be overstated. Methane is saturating the atmosphere now. This is like covering the planet with a layer of glass. The heat gets in, but it doesn't get out. Something the climate science community doesn't tell us. Methane is over 100 times more potent than CO2 as a greenhouse gas. You'll hear the climate science community say it's 20 times more potent, but that's over a 100-year time horizon, Over a 10-year time horizon, methane is 100 times more potent than CO2. Why aren't they telling us that? Nighttime low temperatures are rising twice as fast as daytime high temperatures. This is yet another glaring red flag to confirm the methane buildup in our atmosphere. While official agencies and mainstream corporate media try to downplay this unfolding event in an effort to pacify the public, the danger mounts from what is likely already a runaway greenhouse event, which is being worsened overall, not mitigated, but made worse overall by the ongoing climate engineering insanity. The geoengineers can create short-term cooling events, but that comes at the expense of a long-term worsening of the warming. Each and every one of us, with every breath we take, continues to be exposed to the highly toxic climate engineering fallout. Again, I want to stress the metals named in climate engineering patents like aluminum and barium and other toxic metals are showing up in lab tests all over the globe, about 5 dozen in Shasta County alone. Whether or not a person believes this material is there is irrelevant. It's there, it's showing up, human health tests showing up everywhere. Everyone tested properly for these metals has absolutely off the chart levels. We see Alzheimer's, autism, ADD, asthma, every disorder you would imagine you would be subjected to or that we would see skyrocketing levels of this exposure. We see that happening in the population. How long can you hold your breath? Let's ask that question. Last week, I also talked about the fact that some of the highest ranking U.S. military officials, in this case the former Chief of Staff, General Odierno, after leaving the military, within 1 week became a top banking executive. How does that happen? How does that happen? The same banking cartels like J.P. Morgan, which is where General Odierno went to work, through the revolving door, the military-industrial banking complex, and he shows up as a top executive for J.P. Morgan, one of the same financial institutions that trades weather derivatives. What a surprise. How twisted can all this be? How far out under the plank are all of us already? How many people are asleep at the wheel? How much of the population is absolutely blind in both eyes, seeing what's unfolding around them? We need to wake up. Elements in our government and the military have long since been completely hijacked and are not serving the country or its citizens. Rather, they serve the power brokers that print the dollar. The dollar is the global reserve currency. That is the blood of the empire. The United States is now a corporation. For all practical purposes, it is run by the global elite. Our military brothers and sisters, and I have high respect and regard for so many in our military that have devoted their lives and their time for the right motives, but they're being used as tools of this corporation, not to protect freedom and democracy, as we're told, and we would all like to believe, but for the benefit of this corporation. Please don't believe anything I say. Please just investigate for yourself. How hard will those in power try to protect the dollar hegemony? If the dollar is not the global reserve currency, that's the end of the empire, and that's connected to so much of the conflict we see around the globe. Countries trying to disconnect from the dollar. How many countries have already been destabilized and sent into permanent chaos because their former leaders wanted to disconnect from the dollar? The list is long. The list is long, starting with Saddam Hussein, who wanted to start his own oil trading bourse, disconnecting from the dollar, and immediately he was taken out. Same is true for so many other countries. Gaddafi is one, Iran is another. There's so much more going on than what our corporate mainstream media propaganda machine tells us. Disconnecting from the dollar is something the Western central bankers could not allow. Who's really destabilizing the world at this point? And I'm not advocating any other government. I'm not saying other governments around the world are in any sense necessarily good governments, but I'm saying what is the greatest destabilizing force at this moment? Here's some facts that our corporate media and our government hasn't told us. I've stated this before, but I want to state it again. Iran has not invaded another country for well over 200 years, about 230 years. In the last 20 years, the U.S. has invaded 22 countries. In just over 200 years, the U.S. has invaded 70 nations. Why isn't the corporate media telling us this fact? Such facts will never be mentioned. And I want to make clear again, I'm not condoning religious fanatics. I'm not condoning other countries, any of these fanatic groups that fuel terrorism under many flags, not condoning any of that. I'm just stating that there are facts we are not being told that are essential parts of the equation. How can we have a correct perspective on what's happening if we're not given the facts? And I want to state those facts, period. Those who ignore such facts are clearly not concerned with the truth. These are the same people that don't look at the skies above them and ask what's going on above our heads. As populations begin to wake up to what's happening and why, peaceful citizens are increasingly seen as a threat by our government, who claims to serve them. Those who question the truth are now seen as a threat by our own government. Civil rights are being stripped from citizens by the U.S. government with mechanisms like the so-called Patriot Act, which, by the way, was instituted just after 9/11. 9/11 was a license for a whole lot of things to happen around the world. Important to consider motive. Must always, what's the first question an investigative officer asks with a crime? Who would have the motive? We'll talk more about that again later. Other protective civil rights laws are being completely ignored. The USA is heading rapidly toward what can only be called a police state. While the U.S. Army continues to be used as a tool to destabilize and topple numerous nations for the reasons already stated, the central bankers run the world, and I challenge anyone who doesn't believe this to be the case. Do some honest investigation, and you won't like what you find. Let's ask ourselves, who started ISIS, the latest, greatest threat? Let's investigate that one. And I want to read from an exceptional article from the website Global Research. This is a very reputable website. The article was drafted by Gariaki Chingu. Hope I didn't slaughter that one. The article starts, much like Al-Qaeda, the Islamic State ISIS is made in the USA, an instrument of terror designed to divide and conquer the oil-rich Middle East and to conquer Iran's growing influence in the region. Please listen to the entire article and the facts contained in it before you form any opinion. The article continues, the fact that the United States has a long and torrid history of backing terrorist groups will surprise only those who watch the news, mainstream corporate news, and ignore history. The CIA first aligned itself with the extremist Islam groups during the Cold War era. Back then, America saw the world in rather simple terms. On one side, the Soviet Union and the Third World nationalism, which America regarded as a Soviet tool. On the other side, Western nations and militant political Islam, which America considered an ally in the struggle against the Soviet Union. The old cliche, the enemy of my enemy is my friend, right? This has absolutely been the guiding factor where our government is concerned. The article continues again. The director of the National Security Agency under Ronald Reagan, General William Odom, recently remarked, quote, by any measure, the U.S. has long used terrorism. In 1978 and 79, the Senate was trying to pass a law against international terrorism. In every version they produced, the lawyers said the U.S. would be in violation. That's a direct quote from General William Odom of the U.S. military. Continuing with the article, during the 1970s, the CIA used the Muslim Brotherhood in Egypt as a barrier, both to thwart Soviet expansion and prevent the spread of Marxist ideology among the Arab masses. The United States also openly supported Sekuritas Islam against Sukarno in Indonesia, opposing factions, and supported another form of Islam terror group against Pakistan. Last, but certainly not least, there is Al-Qaeda. Lest we forget, the CIA gave birth to Osama bin Laden in the breastfed organizations during the 1980s. Former British Foreign Secretary Robin Cook told the House of Commons that Al-Qaeda was unquestionably a product of Western intelligence agencies. Mr. Cook explained that Al-Qaeda, which literally means an abbreviation of the database in Arabic, was originally the computer database of the thousands of Islamist extremists who were trained by the CIA and funded by the Saudis in order to defeat the Russians in Afghanistan. Again, for the U.S. government and the CIA, the enemy of their enemy is considered their friend, no matter how dangerous that quote-unquote friend is and how much danger that group will pose in the future, they don't care. They don't care. Continuing, America's relationship with Al-Qaeda has always been a love-hate affair, depending on whether a particular Al-Qaeda terrorist group in a given region furthers American interests or not. The U.S. State Department either funds or aggressively targets that terrorist group. Even as American foreign policymakers claim to oppose Muslim extremism, they knowingly foment it as a weapon of foreign policy. The Islamic State is its latest weapon. That much, like Al-Qaeda, is certainly backfiring. ISIS recently rose to international prominence after its thugs began beheading American journalists. Now the terrorist group controls an area the size of the United Kingdom. In order to understand why the Islamic State has grown and flourished so quickly, one has to take a look at the organization's American-backed roots. The 2003 American invasion and occupation of Iraq created the preconditions for radical Sunni groups like ISIS to take root. America, rather unwisely, destroyed Saddam Hussein's secular state machinery and replaced it with a predominantly Shiite administration. The U.S. occupation caused vast unemployment in Sunni areas. By rejecting socialism and closing down factories in the naive hope that the magical hand of the free market would create jobs, which of course didn't happen. It was a total ransacking of the existing structure. Now what do we have? Massive chaos around the globe with a incredibly bad refugee situation unfolding in Europe. It's all connected. All these events are connected. I'll continue with the article. Under the new U.S.-backed Shiite regime, working-class Sunnis lost hundreds of thousands of jobs. Unlike the white Afrikaners in South Africa, who were allowed to keep their wealth after regime change, upper-class Sunnis were systematically dispossessed of their assets and lost their political influence. What would happen in any country, I want to ask? This is apart from this article. What would happen in any country when you invade it, occupy it, strip its citizens of all their goods, destroy the infrastructure? What can possibly happen but total chaos? What do we have now happening? Total chaos in many Middle Eastern countries. And where does all that chaos, the roads that created it, where do those roads lead back to? Every time. The article continues, rather than promoting religious integration and unity, meaning why didn't the U.S. promote religious integration and unity, American policy in Iraq exacerbated sectarian divisions and created a fertile breeding ground for Sunni discontent from which Al-Qaeda in Iraq took root. That was the goal. That is the goal. Countries in chaos are easily manipulated. The resources are easily stripped and stolen. That's much of what this is about. It's not about freedom and democracy. That is a massive lie, like all the other massive lies we've been fed, and it's time we wake up to that. If we truly care about so-called American values, is this American values? I didn't sign on for this kind of quote-unquote values. This is simply chaos, and if we think because it's somewhere else in the world that we don't have to worry about it or it's not our problem, I don't want this done in my name. I don't want to have any part in the looting, pillaging, and plundering of other countries and the planet as a whole to benefit the 0.1% at the very top of the food chain. I don't want to be a part of that. And I can only hope and pray our military brothers and sisters wake up again to what they're being used for. The article continues. The Islamic State of Iraq and Syria, ISIS, used to have a different name. Al-Qaeda in Iraq, they are one and the same. Connect the dots. Continuing with the article, after 2010, the group rebranded and refocused its efforts on Syria. There are essentially three wars being waged in Syria. One between the government and the rebels, another between Iran and Saudi Arabia, and yet another between America and Russia. It is this third neo-Cold War battle that made U.S. foreign policymakers decide to take the risk of arming Islamist rebels in Syria, because Syrian President Bashar al-Assad is a key Russian ally. Rather embarrassingly, many of these Syrian rebels have now turned out to be ISIS thugs, again, armed by the USA, who are openly brandishing American-made M16 rifles. America's Middle East policy revolves around oil and maintaining the dollar as the global reserve currency, as stated earlier. The fossil fuel resources are needed to keep the military machine running, to keep the aircraft above our heads that are spraying, to keep them flying. Our modern industrial civilization is run by fossil fuels. There's no arguing that. And the quest for those fossil fuels is a top priority for the military industrial machine, even though the utilization of those fuels is killing our planet. And those who don't believe that, again, I challenge you to investigate. Those same fossil fuels used in geoengineering, which is an attempt in many ways to hide the damage already done to the planet by doing even more damage, to keep this whole machine running. These fossil fuels are needed to keep the whole machine running. The empire needs the dollar to be the global reserve currency. And I state the U.S. as an empire because that's what it is now. It's not the country that was built with the ideals that many Americans believe are still in place. Those ideals have long since been erased, and even more so every passing day. All of us have to wake up to what's going on around us. I'll continue with the article. ISIS is not merely an instrument of terror used by America to topple the Syrian government. It is also used to put pressure on Iran. It's important to remember who spawned these terror groups, who has armed them, who has helped to expand them. Continuing, the last time Iran invaded another nation was 1738, much longer than I said in the beginning of this show, by the way. So, we already mentioned how many countries the U.S. has invaded since 1776, 70 nations. Despite what Western media's war cries would have you believe, Iran is clearly not the threat to regional security Washington is. An intelligence report published in 2012, endorsed by all 16 U.S. intelligence agencies, now this is from our own agencies, listen to this, confirms that Iran ended its nuclear weapons program in 2003. I want to state again for the record, the report that came to this indisputed conclusion was endorsed by all 16 U.S. intelligence agencies. Why don't we hear that on our corporate news? Because that's not their goal. Their goal is to fan the flames for global conflict. As the completely artificial economy begins to implode, as the biosphere is imploding, and again, I've connected those two before. When the biosphere implodes, the economy will follow, and the chances are nearly certain that those in power will trigger global conflict, because that's their only way to continue on in power as everything collapses around all of us. So, in the case of Iran, the truth is, any Iranian nuclear ambition, real or imagined, is a result of American hostility towards Iran, not the other way around. Not the other way around. I want to stress, in the case of climate modification, all these Middle Eastern countries have been droughted out into complete chaos from global climate modification programs that the rulers of these countries know what's happening and who's doing it. I challenge anybody listening to search online for film footage of the Iranian leaders on the floor of the United Nations pleading with the UN to acknowledge the fact that their country was being droughted out by NATO weather modification programs. These people know what's being done to them. The people who don't know is the American people. The U.S. population that has, the only clue they have is what they see on Fox News. And who do they show on Fox News? Darth Cheney, the more appropriate name for Dick Cheney, who wouldn't know how to tell the truth if his life depended on it. They don't come any worse than Dick Cheney. I'll get to more of that in a few minutes. America is using ISIS in three ways: to attack its enemies in the Middle East, to serve as a pretext for U.S. military intervention abroad and at home to foment a manufactured domestic threat used to justify the unprecedented expansion of invasive domestic surveillance. By rapidly increasing both government secrecy and surveillance, Mr. Obama's government is increasing its power to watch its citizens while diminishing its citizens' power to watch their government. Who has prosecuted more whistleblowers than all other administrations combined? The Obama administration. And people wonder why there's no whistleblowers. Who was the only one put in prison for blowing the whistle on the torture program implemented by our own government? The whistleblower, John Kiriakou, the only one to be put in prison. That's the kind of government we have. The article continues, terrorism is an excuse to justify mass surveillance in preparation for mass revolt. Those in power know the population is waking up. The population doesn't have much of a choice because they're going to be looking for the next drink of water and the next bite of food not too far down the road. That's how bad things are close to getting. Continuing, the so-called war on terror should be seen for what it really is, a pretext for maintaining dangerously oversized U.S. military, the dangerously oversized U.S. military. The two most powerful groups in the U.S. foreign policy establishment are the Israeli lobby, there's no arguing that, which directs U.S. Middle East policy, and the military-industrial complex. AIPAC is the most well-funded lobby. That's a historical fact. I challenge anybody to look it up. I'm simply stating a fact. And the military-industrial complex, which profits from the former group's actions. Since George W. Bush declared the, quote, war on terror in October 2001, again, leading back to 9/11, how many dominoes were triggered falling from 9/11? This is just one. So George Bush declared the war on terror in October 2001. It has cost the American taxpayer approximately $6.6 trillion and thousands of fallen sons and daughters. But the war have also raked in billions of dollars for Washington's military elite. In fact, more than 70 American companies and individuals have won up to $27 billion in contracts for work in post-war Iraq and Afghanistan over the last 3 years. According to a recent study by the Center for Public Integrity, this study states nearly 75% of these private companies had employees or board members who either served in or had close ties to the executive branch of the Republican and Democratic administrations, members of Congress, or the highest levels of the military. There is no difference between either side of the coin, and the political theater of the completely facade fighting between the two primary parties is an illusion. There is no difference. They are all part of the same cancer. Final paragraph. In 1997, a U.S. Department of Defense report stated the data shows a strong correlation between U.S. involvement abroad and an increase in terrorist attacks against the U.S. Think about that. Why would we expect it to be any different? How would we feel if Iraq invaded the United States for weapons of mass destruction which the United States didn't have? That's the scenario we had with Iraq. And in fact, isn't it interesting that one day after 9/11, the decision was made by those in power, Darth Cheney, Wolfowitz, Rumsfeld, and the rest, to invade Iraq. The decision was actually made long before 9/11. I'll get to that. But why isn't this a red flag for the American population? The only way America can win the war on terror, final paragraph, is if it stops giving terrorists the motivation and the resources to attack America. Terrorism is the symptom. American imperialism in the Middle East is the cancer. Put simply, the war on terror is terrorism. Only it is conducted on a much larger scale by people with jets and missiles. There is no difference. How many wedding parties have been bombed by U.S. drones? How many civilians killed? What would we do? What would we do if Iraq had drones flying over our country and, oops, accidentally bombed a wedding party with 50 innocent people, children? What would we do? The American public needs to take responsibility for letting things go this far. I want to progress now to another subject. Was there a global event that truly accelerated all the insanity? That was a catalyst for the military actions around the globe and for the abandonment of constitutional rights at home? Was this event exactly what radical Washington think tanks like the Project for a New American Century? This is a think tank with Bush, Cheney, Wolfowitz, and the rest, and I'm not separating this administration from the Bush administration or the Clinton administration. We're all talking about part of the same cancer. What this group stated on the record over a year before 9/11, again, I just named some of the names in this group. What did they state on the record over a year before 9/11? They stated this, that America needed a new Pearl Harbor, I'm quoting, in order to carry out its agenda of militarization and global expansion. Again, who was part of this group? Bush, Cheney, Wolfowitz, Rumsfeld, many more. Those who refused to do any investigation into the ongoing blatantly obvious climate engineering, which is wreaking havoc on our planet's life support systems, our health, and all life on Earth, are also the same people that have blindly accepted the 9/11 narrative without ever lifting an eyelid to examine the facts or even ask any real questions. So let's ask some questions. The top 10 questions about 9/11, these questions were assembled by Tony Brasunas. I salute him for this compilation. Let's go through these questions. Why weren't Air Force planes sent up to intercept the hijacked planes? In the year before 9/11, jet fighters were sent up routinely at least 67 times whenever, according to the FAA's own standard of operating procedure manuals, whenever an airline went off course by 2 miles or by 15 degrees, the jets were sent up. And the mainstream media has never highlighted this. Never. Routine FAA and military procedures should have intercepted the first plane before it struck the World Trade Center. Remember, this is interception, not shooting down. Interception happens all the time, like a police car pulling over a speeding motorist on the highway. On 9/11, the FAA was notified by a fanatic stewardess that the plane was hijacked fully 25 minutes before it crashed. Usually it only takes 10 plus minutes, statistically, for jet fighters to go from stationary to 29,000 feet and up to speeds of 1,850 miles per hour. Jets should have intercepted that first plane. But for the second plane, which crashed 15 minutes later, on which it was known to be hijacked 20 minutes before it crashed, the failure to intercept strains believability. Fighter jets should already have been in the air above Manhattan, and then the plane that supposedly struck the Pentagon was known to be hijacked a full 45 minutes before it crashed, after 2 other planes had already been hijacked. Yet, it flew unchallenged over the most protected airspace in the world. That this last plane was not intercepted is simply beyond belief. The Pentagon has the most advanced radar and air defenses in the world. Andrews Air Force Base, which, by the way, is charged with defending the Pentagon, always has fighter jets on ready alert and lies a mere 11 miles away. 1 minute flying time. Another question. Why did George Bush go into a meaningless photo op in an elementary school after hearing that an airliner had crashed into the World Trade Center? He was briefed by National Security Advisor Condoleezza Rice before entering the classroom. She must not have told him that the plane had been hijacked, since the FAA and NORAD had known it had been hijacked 45 minutes by this point, for 45 minutes. She also must not have told him that another plane was hijacked, since it had been known for 20 minutes by this point to have been hijacked. Finally, while listening to the second graders read, why does Bush merely nod calmly when told about the second plane smashing into the World Trade Center? He gazes off into space for minutes while the towers burn. He looked like a deer in the headlights. How many people have seen that film? What kind of president would just stand there looking like a deer in the headlights? Was it the realization of what he had just been a part of? That's a question that needs answered. 3, why did the towers collapse? Very good question. Important to understand this, no steel skyscraper had ever collapsed because of fire. In the 100-year history of steel skyscrapers, none had ever collapsed. And some had burnt for 40 to 50 hours, by the way, down to a steel frame. Never collapsed. The steel used in skyscrapers doesn't melt at temperatures that fire can attain when burning in open air. And it's not even close, by the way. I know a fair bit about this issue. It's about 1,000 degrees short of what it would take to start to melt the steel. Jet fuel is essentially refined kerosene, which burns at around 700 degrees centigrade in optimal, perfect aerated conditions. Even if the fires did get hot, it's not nearly hot enough to melt or even significantly weaken structural steel, which melts around 1,535 degrees centigrade, astronomically higher than the fires in the Trade Center. Also, given the shocking speed and neatness with which both towers fell and the seismic evidence of small earthquakes, think about that. Local seismographs picked up tremors before the towers collapsed. What would do that? What would do that? Demolitions would do that. The fact that the buildings were pulverized instead of falling in chunks makes it appear that the towers actually fell due to controlled demolition rather than fire. It's imperative that an investigation into what happened on 9/11 examine the readily available evidence and this unsettling possibility. I'm giving questions. I'm not offering a conclusion necessarily. I'm just giving questions that should be asked if we give a damn about our country, our children's futures, our own futures. Accepting the official narrative blindly, which, by the way, is a conspiracy theory. When we hear the term conspiracy theory, what a ludicrous term. The official story for 9/11 is a textbook conspiracy theory, but the term conspiracy theory is not used with that story, is it? Only with anyone who questions the official story. Then that term is used. Number 4, don't forget about this building, Building 7. Building 7. I challenge anyone, as I stated last week, and this is all part of the bigger picture because this one event that happened 9/11 was the license by which so much destruction has happened around the globe, and it's just beginning. This event matters. I challenge anyone to search online, Building 7 collapse. Watch that video and tell me if you can possibly believe the official story that that building collapsed to the ground because some couches and chairs were burning on the first floor. Don't forget about this building. Yet another steel skyscraper collapsed from the fire that day. None ever. No steel structure high-rise had ever collapsed, and then 3 in one day. Building Trade Center 7 was another. It was the furthest of the buildings from the Twin Towers. It was located on the next block. Little debris struck this building, and there was no large fires burning inside it. Yet, as that horrendous day was ending, at 5:20 p.m., World Trade Tower 7 collapsed in a remarkable 7 seconds. This is free fall speed. It fell in what appeared to be a perfect implosion-style demolition. Yet, the official story is that it collapsed because of a diesel generator located in its basement exploded, causing the whole building to pancake neatly, floor by floor, to the ground. Is this even remotely plausible? No. No, the laws of physics say it is not. In fact, 2,500 architects and engineers, some of the best professionals, most renowned professionals from around the globe, the Architects and Engineers for Truth movement, 2,500 say this is absolutely, completely beyond the realm of possibility for these collapses to happen. Look it up and see what the experts have to say, 2,500 of them. Let's continue. Number 5, the attack on the Pentagon. Why won't the Pentagon release their video footage of this event? The event was perhaps the most bizarre of all. Consider question 1. Again, the plane that supposedly struck the Pentagon was known to have been hijacked for 45 minutes after 2 other planes had already been hijacked and flown into the World Trade Center. Yet this plane supposedly flew unchallenged over the most protected airspace in the world and then crashed into the earth into the headquarters of our trillion-dollar military. While footage of both World Trade Center crashes has surfaced and been shown countless times on television, no footage of the Pentagon explosion has ever been released. The Pentagon, oddly, chose not only to not release any film footage, they released only 5 still frames from their security cameras footage. One of these 5 frames shows something that might be a plane, a missile, or a gray smear. The other 4 show an exploding fireball on the side of the Pentagon. There was virtually no aircraft debris outside that crash in the photos taken afterward. And those photos are available online, by the way. Yet supposedly the remains of the passengers were all physically identified by the FBI. How can that be? There's no wreckage left from the plane at all. And somehow the FBI identified the remains of all the passengers? Does that make any sense at all? There are so many questions with this issue that have not been properly identified. The explosion completely vaporized tons of steel. Again, yet it didn't destroy the remains of the passengers. How can that be? For a 757 to fit into the extremely small hole in the side of the Pentagon is virtually impossible. Where are the remains? Where are the photographs? All security film footage, by the way, from the surrounding locations was also confiscated within minutes of the event and has never been seen since. Number 6, crash in Pennsylvania. Why was the debris from the plane in Pennsylvania spread out over 8 miles? Think about this. The official story is that the plane crashed after the passengers stormed the cockpit. But normally, when a plane crashes into the ground, the debris ends up in a relatively small area. We have countless aircraft downings to show this, to prove this. Often the fuselage and wings remain near each other. The debris scattering over 8 miles is extremely odd. How can that be? I mean, picture that in your own mind. How can an aircraft crash into the ground and scatter the debris over 8 miles? This is the official story. Is it believable? I don't think so. In fact, if you've seen pictures of this crash, and they are available online, there is no debris at the impact site. There's virtually nothing there. Numerous eyewitness accounts suggest the plane was shot down by another unmarked plane. Number 7, the cleanup looked like a cover-up. Why was the debris from the Pentagon and the World Trade Center destroyed immediately after 9/11? Normally, forensic teams examine all evidence from the crime scene, yet the steel from the collapsed World Trade Center was immediately shipped to Korea and China, where it was melted down within days. That steel would have indicated whether the buildings collapsed due to fire or something that has never happened, and that would mandate drastic redesign of tall buildings. By the way, World Trade Center towers 1 and 2 were designed to take multiple airliner impacts from fully loaded 707s, an aircraft that has more foot-pounds of energy than the aircraft that hit it. Why did they fall? And if the buildings fail so horribly, why in the world would they take that debris away and melt it down, take it to China and melt it down as fast as they could possibly get it there? If that doesn't send up a red flag, you're not paying attention. When an aircraft fails for unknown purposes, they take the pieces and parts of that aircraft to some hangar and spend a year investigating it. Yet with 9/11 and so many casualties, they carted this debris away as fast as they could and melted it down in a foreign country. How can we not question something like that? Number 8, insider trading. Huge red flag. Who were the big investors who knew 9/11 was about to happen? Although the stock trading on American and United Airlines was up by 1,200% the day before. 1,200% the day before 9/11. No public investigation into who profited was ever undertaken. How can that be? How can that stone be left unturned? Hundreds of Arab-looking Americans were later rounded up and interrogated for little apparent reason, but neither the SEC, the Security and Exchange Commission, nor the FBI arrested or investigated any of those who made millions, untold millions, from the uncanny 9/11 stock trading. The FBI's reason? They said they know who made those trades, and the traitors had no conceivable connection to Al-Qaeda. What kind of an explanation is that? We know these traitors, and we say they're okay. This is truly a twisted web, and 9/11 is connected to everything unfolding in our country right now. It is the license by which so much is happening around the globe, and that's why this issue matters so much. If you think you want to look the other way, as Obama has told us to do, let's move on. Let's just move on and forget about it, because he's a part of the issue as well. The cancer that has grown, as Eisenhower warned us, the cancer that has grown in our military-industrial complex is beyond comprehension. Number 9, why did Bush block the formation of the 9/11 Commission? That's a great question. Why did it take 411 days to finally form the commission? When other commissions have been formed in less than a week, it took 6 days to form the Warren Commission, 6 days, on which investigated the assassination of John F. Kennedy. After 411 days, Bush finally forms a commission on such a tragic event. If it hadn't been for the insistent demands of the widows of 9/11, and just 4 of them led the way, there would never have been any 9/11 commission at all. When the 9/11 commission was finally formed, why did Bush withhold funding from it? The commission to investigate the crash of the space shuttle Columbia, which killed 7 people, received $50 million. Bush only allocated $3 million to the 9/11 Commission. He later, after much prodding, acceded to the $11 million. Opposing and resisting an investigation of 9/11 looks ridiculously bad from a political standpoint, so why has Bush done it? As with all of this, the corporate media apparently has no desire to investigate. Perhaps most damning of all is that the 9/11 Commission chairman and the director, both selected by the Bush administration, by the way, 6 of the commissioners, other 9 members, 6 of the other 9 members, also had deep, long-standing ties to this administration and to the intelligence, petroleum, and military-industrial complex. What a surprise. They were charged with investigating. Normally, a suspect does not get to select his judge and jury, even if he's innocent. While we consider independence to be a hallmark of the American judicial system, unfortunately, nothing about the 9/11 Commission was independent. Larger motives. Final point. The people running our country during that time, Bush, Cheney, Rumsfeld, Wolfowitz, Libby, Abrams, are all connected to a group called, as I stated earlier, the Project for a New American Century, PNAC. In fact, Cheney, Rumsfeld, and Wolfowitz, and Jeb Bush are a few of PNAC's original founders. The manifesto of PNAC, Project for a New American Century, written in the late 1990s, calls for the establishment of an American empire to ensure, in their words, quote, political and economic freedom abroad and an international order friendly to American security, prosperity, and principles. Sounds nice, doesn't it? But what does it really mean? The document boldly called for a, quote, 40% increase in the military budget, the formation of a space force, what do we see happening in our skies as well, in addition to the Air Force, a patrol and a control outer space Star Wars missile-to-missile defense system, a fiercer and more potentially global CIA attack matrix, that's in quotes, and an aggressive policy of, quote, preemptive war to defeat enemies before they become strong. In essence, PNAC advocates ruling the world. PNAC's documents sadly acknowledge that the majority of Americans do not want American empire and would not support the formation of one. Quote, absent some catastrophic and catalyzing event, like a new Pearl Harbor. That's quote unquote. Let me read that again, directly from their manifesto from PNAC. The American people do not want American empire and would not support the formation of one, quote, absent some catastrophic and catalyzing event like a new Pearl Harbor. 9 months after this was penned, these people came to power. Strangely enough, they got their new Pearl Harbor. And since 9/11, they've got their 40% increase in the military budget. Exactly 40%, in fact. They've got the beginnings of a Space Force. Star Wars is fully funded as the CIA's total attack matrix. And they clearly got their first preemptive war and others since. If all these facts relating to such an immensely important historical event don't warrant investigation, what does? Again, let's not forget Obama, who stated the following about 9/11. We should look forward and not backward. Here's the point. The entire power structure at the very top is nothing more than a criminal cabal. This includes both parties, and this fact goes back so very far. We have had the son of a president elected for the same office. Now we may be in for a second son holding the same office. We've had a wife of a former president running who is clearly lying about countless issues, including her email accounts. We live in a world built on lies and deception. The public has been all too willing to gulp down the lies in order to keep their own personal pursuits of pleasure going and uninterrupted by any sense of responsibility that would come from facing such harsh realities like what really happened on 9/11, harsh realities like what is happening in our skies, what irreparable damage has it already done to our health, our children's health, and to the planet on which all of our futures depend. These are realities very few are willing to face, but we will be forced to face them. The sooner we do, the more chance we may have of salvaging something. The longer the machine continues to grind forward in its current form, the less chance we will have for any future, for any reality. And I stress, mathematically speaking, on the current trajectory, this is hard math, we are on track for certain near-term global extinction. This is a mathematical fact. Look at the statistics. We're losing 300 species of plant, animal, and insect a day. Forests burning up around the globe. The oceans are dying. We have refugees everywhere, and they're not migrants. They're refugees. For all the reasons we've already just named. Droughted out countries in order to occupy and bring in war, destroy infrastructure. The walls are closing in. We are now in completely uncharted water. The biosphere is imploding by the day. This fact will not be possible to ignore much longer. This fact will soon make it impossible to maintain the delusion of a perpetually expanding economy in a world that has already been looted, pillaged, and plundered. As reality becomes impossible to hide from the population, will global conflict be triggered by those in power? How real of a possibility is that? This is an inevitability on this track, and all the signs are there. It's shaping up, and how many false flags have we already had? It's historical fact. Vietnam War was a false flag event. Started on lies. Same with the invasion of Iraq. Known lies. But the American population has so far not cared enough to stand up, and the American population is the last potentially counterbalancing force in the world. Is it any wonder why neurological disorder has escalated higher in America than any other country in the world in the last 10 years? We are being subjected to who knows what in the aircraft spraying above our heads, but this is a statistical fact. The increase in neurological disorders in America has escalated at a more rapid rate than any other country in the world in the last decade. Think about that. How much do they not want the American public to be able to respond? All the major powers have long since collaborated on certain issues. Climate engineering is one of those issues. There's no question collaboration has gone on for a very, very long time. I found a picture of Soviet weather modification scientists touring U.S. weather modification facilities in 1968 at the height of the Cold War. All the major powers are involved in climate engineering. There's no question about that. They're all covering each other on that particular issue, even if they're opposing powers otherwise. The walls are closing in fast from a great many directions. What will each of us choose to do at this late hour? Will we go on about our lives as if nothing's wrong? Will we pretend nothing's wrong? Will we not look around and see the dying trees, the lack of bugs, the lack of birds, the scaldingly hot heat whenever you get a direct shot of sun from the destroyed ozone layer, directly related to climate engineering? No ozone layer, no life on Earth, by the way. Global oxygen content is plummeting. That's a mathematical fact because forests aren't producing oxygen. We've lost 50 to 60% of Earth's plankton populations. No plankton, no life on Earth. These walls are closing in from every direction. If you don't believe it, you will soon. Wait and see. So what do? Do we bury our collective heads in the sand even further? Or will we do everything in our power to protect the future of our children, of our planet, and thus of our country? Educate yourself on the hard facts from independent sources. Make your voice heard in the battle for the greater good. Every day counts in this battle. This is Dane Wigington for GeoEngineering Watch, Radio, and Global Alert News. Until next week, thank you very much.
For several decades, the U.S. government has been officially prohibited from disseminating propaganda for domestic consumption. That changed on July 2nd when a revised version of the Smith-Mundt Act went into effect. That measure had prevented Radio Free Europe, Voice of America, and other government-funded propaganda organs from transmitting their programs domestically at broadcast quality levels within the United States. It was feared that domestic use of that material would undermine the freedom and independence of the press. The Broadcasting Board of Governors, which supervises those media outlets, says that the revision is necessary in order to make the broadcast available to foreign expatriates living in the U.S. and to allow taxpayers to sample what they're paying for.
The NSA's data collection facility in Bluffdale, Utah will devour huge amounts of data, and it will take a huge amount of water to cool the computer servers needed to store that data. Salt Lake City NBC affiliate KSL reports that the NSA's data center will require an estimated 1.7 million gallons of water a day. That section of Utah is a desert that was once so arid that explorer John C. Fremont was convinced nothing would ever grow there. The NSA's facility is likely to have a dramatic impact on municipal and agricultural water supplies. Local officials are already exploring new conservation measures to accommodate the spy facility.